Good afternoon, colleagues and attendees. We are beginning the panel session of the Dissertation Board for the Defense of the Thesis by Evguenii Zazdravnykh for the degree of the Candidate of Economics, Specialization 080005, Economics and Management of the National Economy. The topic is Entrepreneurship Development in Economically Differentiated Regions of Russia. By order of St. Petersburg State University, as of the 25th of May 2018, I, Professor Evguenii Cheberko, Doctor of Economics, Professor of the Department of Economics of an Enterprise and Entrepreneurship, was appointed Chair of the Dissertation Board. Allow me to introduce my colleagues, members of the Dissertation Board. Professor Igor Arenkov, Doctor of Economics, Professor of the Department of Economics of an Enterprise and Entrepreneurship of St. Petersburg State University. Professor Natalia Golubetskaya, Doctor of Economics, Professor of the Department of Management and Planning of Socio-Economic Processes of St. Petersburg State University. Professor Alexander Khodachuk, Doctor of Economics, President of St. Petersburg branch of the National Research Institute, High School of Economics. Professor Christopher Gary, PhD in Economics, University of Oxford, United Kingdom. Let me remind you that under the federal law number 127 as of the 23rd of August on science and state scientific and technical policy, St. Petersburg University is entitled to confer academic degrees. The corresponding order on the procedure of granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University was issued on the 1st of September 2016. Defenses take place only according to the scholarly trends specified by the Ministry of Science of the Russian Federation. The relevant order on granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University was issued on the 1st of September 2016. According to this order, the panel discussion is valid providing 2/3 of the appointed board members are present. The total number is not to be fewer than 4 people. The dissertation board consists of 5 people today, 5 of which are present. Therefore, we have a quorum. The panel discussion cannot exceed 2 hours. Now let me announce the agenda. Item 1. The chair's presentation about the documents submitted by the candidate for the degree and their conformity with the requirements. Item 2. The candidate's presentation providing an overview and findings of the research. No more than 15 minutes. Item 3. Questions to the candidate regarding the presentation. No more than 2 minutes for each question. Number 4, Chair's overview of the submitted reports on the thesis, external reports, if any. Number 5, reports on the thesis from the members of the dissertation board. Members of the board are requested to provide their viewpoints, critical remarks and questions, no more than 5 minutes per each member of the board. Item 6. The candidate's comments about the reports on the thesis, no more than 15 minutes. Then we have question-answer session, questions from the audience. The floor will be given to the non-board attendees. They can give a brief account of their ideas or ask questions to the candidate about the research. No more than 5 minutes per each person. It is necessary to fill in the registration form and give their full name before the talk. Then the floor will be given to the thesis advisor, no more than 3 minutes. Then we have a 5-minute break before the open balloting on conferring or non-conferring the academic degree. The discussion of the results of the defense is not broadcast. Next, open balloting, vote counting by the chair of the board, and recording the results in the minutes of the session. Deciding upon conferring or not conferring the academic degree. And then finally, the candidate's closing speech, no more than 2 minutes. Before we proceed with the agenda, I kindly ask you to switch off your mobile phones. Thank you. Let me inform you that the panel session of the Dissertation Board is being recorded and broadcast on the internet, on the SPBU official web portal, and it's being interpreted into English and into Russian. So we are now starting with the first item of the agenda. The thesis by Evguenii Zazdravnykh for the submitted in conformity with the requirements for the degree of the candidate of science, specialization 080005, Economics and Management of the National Economy, topic Entrepreneurship Development in Economically Differentiated Regions of Russia, was approved for defense by the order of the SPBU Academic Secretary on the 25th of May this year. The Dissertation Board was set up by the order of SPBU Academic Secretary, and I have already introduced its members to you. The candidate has submitted the following documents to the SPBU Academic Secretary. First, an application to Professor Nikolai Kropochev, Rector of St. Petersburg State University, on the approval of the thesis for defense. Then, Master of Economics diploma, a letter of verification issued by SPBU, and certifying that Evguenii Zazdravnykh was enrolled in a postgraduate course in St. Petersburg State University. Letter of verification certifying that he successfully completed a postgraduate course and passed 3 qualifying exams in a foreign language, English, economics and management of the national economy, as well as history and philosophy of science. Another document is the report of the thesis advisor, Professor Yuri Kuznetsov. Another document is the approval of the thesis for defense, signed by the Vice Rector for Research, by Sergei Aplonov. Another document is a list of published works containing 7 items which describe major research findings. 6 works have been published in peer-reviewed journals recommended by the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation. Out of the 6 papers, 1 paper was published in a Scopus indexed journal. There is also 1 chapter published in a collaborative monograph. And finally, he submitted a thesis in Russian and English, a printed version with the manuscript copyright, and a digital copy. The above-mentioned documents comply with item 12 of section 3 of the Order on Granting Academic Degrees in St. Petersburg State University. We are proceeding to the next item on the agenda, and this is the candidates' report on the research findings. Please try to be pretty brief. You only have 15 minutes. distinguished chair of the board, distinguished members of the Dissertation board, attendees, I'd like to report on the study I conducted and submitted in conformity with the requirements for Specialization 080005, Economics and Management of the National Economy. The topic of the study, Entrepreneurship Development in Economically Differentiated Regions of Russia. I conducted my study at the Department of Management and Planning of Socio-Economic Process of St. Petersburg State University. Academic advisor, Professor Kuznetsov, Doctor of Economics. My study is relevant. Many researchers speak about low effectiveness of Russian policy concerning entrepreneurship. According to the experts, the measures they take are not effective enough concerning the current problems. There is specifics of conducting business from region to region. Differentiation of regions is increasing when it comes to social and economic development. Entrepreneurship can bridge the gap between growing polarity of these regions, but to meet this end, we have to understand which regional characteristics affect that. Many scholarly works have been published in this respect. They mostly focus on such areas as Great Britain, Germany, the United States, and others. However, Russian experience still remains little studied. There aren't enough works which analyze the role of individual personal qualities of entrepreneurs and regional specific, which affects their business. This dissertation develops a theoretical model of entrepreneurship development in economically differentiated regions of Russia and provides policy recommendations for the development of an entrepreneurship policy in these regions. I'd like to state that entrepreneurship in our study is defined as an initiative activity of an individual designed to earn profit from selling goods that are produced by him or his organization. The first chapter analyzes reasons which motivate people to become entrepreneurs. Semyon Dyankov and the co-authors show that entrepreneurship is chosen by those whose relatives or friends have their own business. They are interested in the social capital, in greater income, even if it requires giving a bribe. The choice of whether becoming or not an entrepreneur is affected by several factors: the development of financial markets, competitive environment, and others. There are many factors which determine entrepreneurship. Based on current empirical studies, we tried to develop an occupation choice model of a payroll employee and an entrepreneur, and to try to understand which reasons are behind each choice. Thus, we developed a utility function of each career path, entrepreneurship or a payroll job. In particular, an individual would choose a job which has a bigger utility. The analysis of this function shows that individuals are really interested in increasing their income are less likely to choose a profession they have a talent or inclination to. Though, if they appreciate having a job which matches their talent, they are more likely to make the right choice. The advantage of this function is that an individual with an entrepreneurial talent chooses this activity, even if it provides a lower income than a payroll job. Still, he will gain intangible benefits from being involved into this kind of business. Those who have a special talent to entrepreneurship can show higher performance at their enterprises. However, to make this kind of choice, they have to have special personal characteristics or an equilibrium of incomes if there is choice between two kinds of career paths. To test our theoretical assumptions, we analyzed the data of the World Values Survey, its Russian sample. It showed that monetary remuneration is more important than the job itself for Russian entrepreneurs. To get these conclusions, we conducted econometric analysis using the logistic model. Control variables are given in the slide. We controlled such parameters as gender, age, and marital status. To understand the link between a talent and the choice of job, we used a proxy variable. Entrepreneurs are often those whose talent is different from the job they do. We also try to analyze how regional specifics affects whether people choose a payroll job or entrepreneurship. Regions with higher unemployment rate and lower regional GRP per capita are more likely to become entrepreneurs. We also analyzed salary and job satisfaction. The analysis revealed that job satisfaction is high among those whose education is in line with what they do in their job. Of course, job satisfaction, and it's only natural, is high in those regions which are generally richer and have a bigger share of high-tech sectors. The third chapter of our study provides recommendations to improve federal and regional policy of entrepreneurship. Statistical data analysis revealed that if we increase financing and this financial support of entrepreneurs, it doesn't anyhow positively affect the number of entrepreneurs among economically active population. The thing is that the list of direction in which entrepreneurship activities can be conducted is now exhaustive, and our recommendation was to make this list non-exhaustive. In this case, constituents of the Russian Federation will not have to strictly follow these directions set by the government authorities, which often fail to match regional specifics. Finally, we provide recommendations to improve regional policy when it comes to entrepreneurship development. It's value-based. The policy has to be valuable not only for the entrepreneurs, but for the society in general. Designated agencies have to work so that they create value when performing their job. This has to be a decentralized approach, and some responsibilities have to be delegated by federal authorities to regional authorities. Only this way the policy can be socially valuable. In conclusion, let me focus on the theoretical and practical value of my study. We have developed an economic and mathematical model. It explains how a career choice is made. Empirical studies pin up our conclusions. The practical value lies in the recommendations we have developed for federal decision makers. Regional policy does not motivate regional designated agencies enough so that they can see the specifics of their regions. One of the possible ways to improve current policy is the delegation of authority of civil servants. Apart from that, we developed a value-based approach to design and implement this original policy. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Are there any questions? Are there any questions on the presentation? You offer a value-based approach. In your presentation, this is page 8. A value-based approach in public administration. There are many items here. Could you focus on this one? To take into account personal characteristics of entrepreneurs and public servants. What are your recommendations here, and what do you mean by personal characteristics of public servants? It's motivation to take steps to improve the situation. They can aim to obtain financing from the federal budget. They can strive to develop programs in line with the regional requirements. They can focus only on the federal goals and aims, and on the other hand, they can focus on what regions require. Usually, public servants follow certain instructions. They have a strategy, they follow a certain tactics, they have some norms of behavior when it comes to performing their functions. These recommendations do not anyhow contradict current laws and regulations. This is additional material. They are really of advisory nature. They aim only to improve the current situation. The title of your study has this term, economical differentiation of Russia. And you also speak about designated agencies that have to deal with these issues. However, in your report, you didn't provide any information about this economical differentiation. Which regions are stagnating? Which regions are leaders? Which regions are keeping to the middle path in their development? Can you give a brief overview of the current situation in the regions? Thank you for your comment and the question. I accept that I didn't speak enough about the differentiation of regions in line with entrepreneurship development. When I was preparing my dissertation, I had some technical issue because I couldn't find data on the number of entrepreneurs among actively working population. By differentiation, I imply social and economical situation in each region. This information is open source information. This is data on regional employment, average regional salary. This data would make your dissertation more well-grounded. I can't but agree with you here. I will consider this remark in our future studies. I have another question. In the list of preferences that you have here, this one which makes people choose entrepreneurship, as a career path. I'm talking about the determinants of the development of entrepreneurship in Russia. These factors, as far as I understand, these determinants are part of a model. And there you're talking about a kind of readiness to take a bribe. Do you mean to say that any individual who'd like to become an entrepreneur is ready to go to prison because it looks like it's an indispensable part of his activity, giving or taking bribes, rather giving bribes? Semyon Dyankov is the scholar who studied this issue. Their study focused on whether an individual is ready to breach the law and to which extent he's ready to do that. So I took this data from his work. Maybe it would have been more appropriate to write something like readiness to breach legislation. People often breach legislation, not because they're actually willing to do that, but because they're not aware of the consequences of doing that. Your wording was too straightforward. Thank you for your comment. It's a follow-up question. Could you specify this? How did you determine these determinants of entrepreneurship development? I mean, these factors that we can see on this slide now. Did you conduct any analysis or anything? This is based on literature review. We analyzed and then provided a brief overview of this information. We took it from theoretical sources. So you didn't conduct any factor analysis? No, I didn't. In this handout, let's focus on page 5 and 6. These are variables. I mean, gender, age, marital status. Why do you consider these parameters crucial? And how did you come to the conclusion that they are crucial? Perhaps an ability of knowing how to give bribes is more important than marital status. This one here is also based on a literature review we provided in the first chapter. In regression analysis, they always use such variables as age and others. So you stick to the demographic parameters and you don't take into account psychological characteristics. Thank you. I also have one question.
It works? Yeah. Just a brief follow-up to this on the same theme. So you established these characteristics and so on from a review of the international literature largely. But in terms of your empirical findings, maybe it would just be helpful to say at this stage whether there are Russian-specific findings and how they relate to the same literature, in fact, that you motivate your study with.
Так. Ну, соответственно, по...
Could you please repeat your question? Could you please repeat your question? Could you please repeat your question because the candidate didn't hear it all right? Could you please switch on the mic? I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Is it working?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, fine, thank you.
So with respect to the international...
Sorry, can't hear you.
Yeah. Is okay? I think I hold...
Теперь я слышу.
So could you please repeat your question now?
Ага, ага. Спасибо за интересный вопрос.
Thank you for a very interesting question. We managed to find certain correlation between Russian entrepreneurships and those individuals or whose work is analyzed in international literature. It was especially true about individual characteristics of German entrepreneurs. In Russia, entrepreneurs are people in their late 30s, mostly men. However, there is one important distinction. We found out that the level of education is not crucial, though it still remains a debatable issue. Another important thing, it concerns the second chapter, which provides value-based analysis. The results we obtained there are in line with Semyon Dyankov's work and the work of his co-authors for the Russian sample. Have you answered the question, and are there any more questions? If there are no more questions from my colleagues, let me ask one more question. When you speak about the note of your study, you say you have analyzed and classified factors of entrepreneurship development, taking into consideration institutional environment. I've been thinking a lot about this wording. Could you please interpret that from Russian into Russian? I can't grasp it. Can you explain that in some other words? Once again, we have identified and classified factors that explain entrepreneurship development in correspondence with the institutional environment. When analyzing theoretical works in this issue, we focused on how scholars analyze different factors. Why do some factors foster the development, while other factors impede the development of entrepreneurship. And most scholars would conclude their publications with the words that there are institutions which can explain this correlation. After we provide a general overview of relevant theoretical works, we came to this conclusion. Still, I don't grasp it. The development of entrepreneurship depends on institutions. How does the degree of dependence, how can the degree of dependence lie in as the basic framework of your classification? We meant that institutions determine the way factors influence entrepreneurship. But what do you mean by the degree of dependence? I mean, whether the factor impacts a lot or to a smaller degree. Well, I'm not really satisfied with that. Still, let us continue with our agenda. The next item is about external reports. We haven't received any external reports, which means now on the agenda we have a report by the thesis advisor, Professor Kuznetsov. You're welcome to take the floor. Distinguished Chair, distinguished members of the Dissertation Board and attendees. I'd like to say that Evguenii and I have been working in close collaboration for many years. He was our student on bachelor and master program. Then he enrolled on a postgraduate course. We worked together in grant programs. We conducted research together. He published a chapter in a monograph. He was active internationally as well. He has been always very active in scholarly activities. And another important thing is that he was a sort of a social observer. He wrote analytical reviews. I disagreed upon one issue with him. That was his paper that criticized the work of university professors. Now he's a university professor himself, and I suppose he has changed his mind since then. I hope this occupation allowed him to review his position about academic personnel. I think as his academic supervisor, I should speak about his personality more, rather than about the research itself. I can speak about his research at length. It's a very interesting study. In November, we are hosting an interesting conference, and you're welcome to take part in it. I think that, after all, Evguenii Zazdravnykh can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of economics. Let's now proceed with the reports of the members of the Dissertation Board. Professor Arenkov, could you take the floor first? I have submitted my report. It's in line with all the requirements. I consider this study to be relevant and up-to-date. It focuses on the specifics of entrepreneurs, their personalities and individual features, It takes into account regional specifics. This differentiation from region to region greatly impacts entrepreneurship in regions. Research findings are well substantiated and well grounded. The study is based on a robust literature review, both international and Russian, and the results of the study were reported at several international conferences as well as in Russia. I find the study novel, and the research findings are really relevant. Many of them base themselves on the empirical conclusions, and in my questions I touched upon that. I suppose that a modern scholarly piece of writing should be an empirical study more rather than a work that bases itself on some theoretical material purely. It was interesting to read about the impact of personal characteristics of entrepreneurs and about regional specifics as well. My critical remarks. The first chapter. It would be interesting to see the analysis of entrepreneurship in the European part of Russia and in Siberia. These regions differ greatly in social and economic indicators. You should have analyzed the amount of subsidies into regions depending on such factors as the gross regional product and the amount of the number of working population in the regions and other factors. It's not quite clear which method you used to identify the factors of entrepreneurship development. Did you form these factors as a result of literature review, or is it the list that you compiled yourself? Well, actually, that was the question that I have already asked. In general, I'd like to conclude that Evguenii Zazdravnykh can be conferred the academic degree of the candidate of science in the relevant specialization. It was our initial agreement that the candidate will provide answers to critical remarks and questions after we have finished reading out all the reports. Professor Golubetskaya, the study is relevant. It analyzes the correlation between the development of entrepreneurship and regional specifics, taking into account personal characteristics of entrepreneurs. The dissertation is logical. It is well written and coherent. All the research tasks and objectives have been met and are in line with the topic. The results have been reported at international and national conferences. Major research findings were reported in peer-reviewed journals. What concerns the novelty, I'd like to state that he has identified and classified factors that affect entrepreneurship development, the reasons behind choosing entrepreneurship, define the level of entrepreneurship development in Russia. Econometric analysis and the analysis of surveys were conducted. The study also reveals which regions are more active when in entrepreneurship. Of special interest are recommendations for federal policy makers. The results of this study can be used when developing strategic and targeted programs of developing entrepreneurship at regional levels, especially concerning small and medium businesses. My critical remark number one: you should have written more clearly about the tools which stir entrepreneurship in regions. Number two, you used evidence from Leningrad Oblast. Based on that, you could have analyzed which best practices exist in other regions of Russia. Number three, you should have identified which types of entrepreneurship improves social and economic situation in regions. In conclusions, I'd like to say that the dissertation by Evguenii Zazdravnykh corresponds to the major requirements set forth in the relevant Order of St. Petersburg State University, and the candidate can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of science, specialization 080005, economics and management of the national economy. Thank you. And now I'd like Christopher Gary to take the floor, PhD in economics, University of Oxford.
Thank you. I'd first like to congratulate the candidate on what is a very sophisticated piece of writing. I very much enjoyed the thesis. It's ambitious in scope. It demonstrates an extremely sophisticated and thorough grasp of the relevant international literature, and which is described and analyzed in extremely interesting and at times novel ways. The attempt to integrate a theoretical model, albeit a rudimentary one, I would say, with a variety of empirical analyses using different data sets is ambitious and well executed in most parts. Across the three main chapters of the thesis, there are important contributions to the scholarly literature in each chapter and important contributions to the field of entrepreneurial policy and understanding of entrepreneurship and its development and role and determinants in Russia. So the body of work in whole is impressive. It's informed by theory. It draws heavily on the Russian context while being empirically robust and interpreted in original and often imaginative ways. In my report, I've detailed some specific comments and questions that I would have, which are inevitable, I think, for any kind of empirical work like this, but this isn't necessarily the place to go into the minutiae. So I want to just comment on some econometric issues and some policy issues in a more broad brush way, by way of critical discussion. First of all, in the implementation of the econometric, of the empirical testing, in Chapter 2 in particular, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more analysis of potential counterfactuals. So, for example, you take the World Values Survey data for Russia and you test your model and you find something which isn't very surprising, that people value income rather highly. Going back to my earlier question, I wonder if you would find exactly the same or some different things if you took the equivalent data from other countries. Similarly, when you come to test your model of occupational choice, I wonder how much of that story that you tell is about choosing entrepreneurship or not choosing entrepreneurship. Whether you could take different classifications of occupations, put them into the same model, and find similar patterns of occupational choice. What is it that's specific to entrepreneurship here. You try and get at that by linking it to your theoretical discussion and the literature more broadly, and that's fine. But I think to take the research forward, really identifying the specifics of entrepreneurial occupational choice is still something that can be taken a little bit further. Similarly, in the way that you corral the data, you often seem to, as far as I understand at least, take relatively small sample sizes because you look at entrepreneurs or specific classes of individuals. And I wonder again whether you could test entrepreneurial choice and some of the determinants of it by using the full sample at your disposal and for a range of different occupations, and perhaps interacting perhaps with some of these personal characteristics to try and find the drivers of different occupational choices. And in turn, that would shed light on my previous query as well. And then in terms of this nice finding, which you repeated again in your slides today, that individuals value high income more than an exciting job, which is, as I say, a not very surprising finding. I would have liked you to have explored the possible non-linearities of that observation. And then, so that's my main question, my main points on the empirical side. Just a couple of sort of policy thoughts. In the thesis, you discuss the distribution of values and whether the distribution of values is conducive to the development of entrepreneurship given the nature of your model. And I wonder if it's the case that the distribution of values that give rise to entrepreneurship is not appropriate somehow, how can policy influence the distribution of those values? And maybe another way of asking that is, what exactly are those values in real terms once you get away from variables and simple models? And then in your conclusion on the regions, you talk about the need to make regions high-tech, and that's an implication of your empirical findings. How do you go about making a region as high-tech? It's all very well saying regions that are high-tech are more conducive to entrepreneurship, but what are those methods and tools that policymakers could use? And then finally, I always like to see in a thesis that I examine some hint of a vision for taking a research agenda from this forward. The thesis reflects a research agenda that you've had, and I would have liked to have seen something about the future research agenda. So what are the lessons from your study for the bigger picture literature, not for Russian policy? I know that that's what you have to emphasize in the thesis, but for the scholarly literature more broadly on entrepreneurship. Even if, for example, what's missing from the evidence base? What does your model and empirical evidence tell us is missing from the survey gathering database, for example? We're always constrained by data. Is there something we could do differently when we gather the data for entrepreneurship? So where's the future gaps that your research agenda can fill? But to conclude, your thesis reads well, is impressive in scope and ambition. It compares extremely favorably to theses that I've been external examiner for in a number of different countries in Europe, and I fully recommend this as a thesis worthy of the qualification for which you've put forward. So I commend you on your work. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the floor is given to Professor Hadachik. I have read this thoroughly. And if we analyze the requirements set forth to such scholarly works, then this thesis conforms to all the relevant requirements. It has novelty, it's quite up-to-date. Today we hear a lot of a lot of policymakers and politicians talking about regional development. still regional authorities are not always able to implement those policies they find effective for their regions due to certain limitations. So the study is really relevant. There is a gap in the literature on this issue. There isn't enough focus on regional entrepreneurship development. My review is positive. In my review, I give 6 ideas which describe what makes the study novel. Now I'd like to focus on some debatable points. Today, we heard you talking a lot about delegating responsibilities to local authorities. Is that really possible? We have charters of regions of the Russian Federation, and there are charters of municipalities of the Russian Federation, and they have to act within the regulations stipulated in these charters. You write about public servants, and it's not quite clear how they will be implementing these responsibilities if they are delegated to them. We already have a couple of federal laws which have already delegated these responsibilities. However, when you delegate responsibilities, this has to be pinned up financially. These are the so-called federal budgets, and this entails transformation of the tax code of the Russian Federation. You don't touch upon this issue at all. You say we have to focus on some other supportive initiatives apart from financing. So this assumption requires explanation on your part. Number 2, what concerns the value-based approach in public administration, you write about decentralization of decision-making from federal to regional level or the municipal level. Again, here we deal with delegation of responsibilities, which is regulated strictly by relevant laws and regulations. Here, you should have provided the analysis of Russian laws and regulations dealing with this issue. Again, if you speak about regional responsibilities, you should have written how these responsibilities are in line with each specific region, because each region is different by its social and economic indicators. These were my questions. One thing that I can recommend: in your empirical study, you focus on St. Petersburg and Leningrad Oblast. However, this brings us back to the title of your dissertation, Entrepreneurship Development in Economically Differentiated Regions of Russia. Still, your focus is solely on the 2 most successful regions of Russia in the northwestern federal district of the Russian Federation. Here we enjoy unprecedented growth of small and medium enterprises. And St. Petersburg is really attractive for investors. It has a high ranking and it's among top 20 in terms of investment attractiveness. Why didn't you concentrate on economically stagnating regions? My second critical remark is about the term freedom. you write about freedom of local public authorities. This brings us back to those charters and laws and regulations which govern their activity. You use this term freedom rather liberally, I'd say. This economic freedom is something that reminds me of the capability of giving a bribe. The consequences might be tragic. All in all, my critical remarks do not aim to anyhow undermine the quality of the study. Let me state that the dissertation by Evguenii Zazdravnykh corresponds to the requirements set forth to the specialization 080005. Thank you. Now let me report on the study. My report was duly submitted to St. Petersburg State University and it was uploaded on its website. So for those who are interested can read them online, and I'll focus only on the essentials. I will not speak about the relevance, though it's obvious. Talking about the novelty of the study, it's there, the research is interesting, it's not devoid of originality. Some of the assumptions and conclusions are innovative. And the approaches you take to solve some of the issues are non-trivial. The study has significant practical application. You provide working recommendations. The results the candidate has obtained are original and novel. As any other creative piece of work, this research is not devoid of some disputable points. I think the candidate was right when he stated at the very beginning that by entrepreneurship he meant small and medium business. And then he analyzed only small and medium companies. This reminds me of John Gilbert, who used the concept of and also another scholar, Peter Drucker, by small enterprises with innovative constituents are considered as entrepreneurial. Regional specifics not only does not only affect small and medium business. I believe it also affects big companies. I'd like to find out why the candidate ignored this topic. I mean, the impact of regional specifics on big business. My second critical remark. The candidate is really successful when interpreting existing theoretical concepts. However, sometimes he is mistaken. Here I mean Baumo's concept. There, he speaks about productive, non-productive, and destructive entrepreneurship. The author is first cautious about this concept, and he states directly that this theory needs verification. However, in his final conclusions, he writes that economic growth is only provided by innovative activities and innovative enterprises, or other enterprises either impede or do not anyhow affect economic development. I'd say the latter refers to is shadow economy. However, there is not a word about shadow economy in the thesis. If we speak about innovation-driven enterprises, their share among small and medium businesses is not that big in Russia. It was wrong not to focus on big companies. And you should also remember about the political and social role of this sector. My next remark is as follows. When analyzing entrepreneurship, I find it really challenging and almost impossible to focus on each and every factor which determines its development. Still, my question is again about shadow economy. You should have focused on that. Moreover, you state in your thesis that this is a topic you have to focus in future. Sometimes in Russia, shadow economy is the only possible way to become an entrepreneur. In conclusion, let me state that the dissertation conforms to all the requirements set forth in the relevant regulations on granting academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University, and the candidate can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of science, specialization 080005, Economics and Management of the National Economy. Now, when we have read out all the reports on the thesis, it's time for the candidate to answer the questions and to comment on any critical remarks from these reports. Distinguished members of the dissertation board, first off, let me thank you for the invaluable comments and for the critical remarks that you made. This is something that really opens up new vistas for my future research. I'll try to be brief and keep within the time limits. First, questions by Igor Arinkov. Your first question and comment is similar to Professor Hadachik's question. The analysis of European part of Russia and Siberia should have been based on different factors, and that's something I should do in my future research. Your question about literature review. I developed my personal conclusions. In future, I think it's feasible to use meta-analysis or factor analysis. Thank you for this remark. The next report was by Professor Golubetskaya. Thank you for your contribution. The questions of economic policy in entrepreneurship development is always an interesting, exciting topic. It has always been interesting for practitioners and scholars alike. Unfortunately, it was outside the scope of my study to fully inform you of all the factors, and current data allows to make more relevant conclusions. I'd like to thank you, Professor Gary, for your valuable contribution. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for your report in general. Thank you for agreeing to become a member of this dissertation board. Your first question was about the definition of entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurship is defined by other scholars. The definition we find in scholarly works, they are similar to what I offer. There are some differences, minor differences, and these minor differences in the definition of the concept affect the study, and these gives ground for the debate. As for your second comment from your report, testing the models can improve their quality, especially if we take a bigger samples which include not only entrepreneurs but payroll employees. This is something that we will consider in our future studies to improve the results we already have. Thank you. Now the questions by Professor Hadachuk. Thank you, Professor Hadachuk. When I was designing my study, I didn't have enough statistical data that would broaden the analysis and would allow us to focus on case studies of economically stagnating regions. Again, this is something that we will have to do in future because there are huge differences between southern and northern part of Russia. This might lead to interesting research findings. And finally, questions by Professor Evguenii Chiberko, the chair of the board. As for small, medium, and big enterprises, mostly entrepreneurs are those working in small and middle enterprises, because in big companies we have usually a board of directors, and it's difficult to really draw the line between a major entrepreneur and a big shareholder, major shareholder. This is something that limited our study, and again, something to focus on in future. As for your second remark about innovation-driven entrepreneurship and how it contributes into the economic development, I believe there is too much attention given to the role of entrepreneurship in economic development of the country, which is especially true of developing countries. Many of them started when there was no legal entrepreneurship at all. As for shadow economy and shadow entrepreneurship, these issues are raised not only in my study, they are in focus of other scholars, international scholars and Russian scholars alike. I'd like to note that in this case, a question often always arises: what's meant by shadow entrepreneurship? Why do I find that important? Because it has to be measured or estimated. somehow. Do you find these answers satisfying? The next item on our agenda, we have question and answer session. The floor can be given to any non-board members. Is there anyone willing to take the floor? No? Then we have a 5-minute break to discuss the issue of conferring or non-conferring the academic degree. I would like all the board members, I would kindly ask all the board members to leave the hall. I also ask you to switch off the broadcast. Ladies and gentlemen, attendees, according to the agenda, the board members have to discuss the results of the defense not only privately, we also have to vote for or against the dissertation. This is just a minor formality, but we still have to follow this agenda. So I put to the vote the issue of conferring the academic degree. So I will ask each of you in turns whether you are for or against conferring the degree. Professor Arenkov, I'm for conferring the degree. Professor Golubetska, what's your opinion? I'm for conferring the degree of the candidate of economics. Professor Hadachik. I'm in favor of this dissertation. I'm voting for. I'm in favor of this dissertation. I'm voting for conferring the academic degree of the candidate of sciences and economics. Professor Christopher Gary, what's your opinion? I'm voting for.
I'm also in favor and voting for.
Thank you. Professor Evguenii Chibirko, I join my colleagues and I'm voting for. I'm in support of this unanimous decision on conferring the academic degree of the candidate of sciences in economics. So this decision has to be stated in the minutes of the meeting. 5 members of the dissertation board were present. 5 out of 5 members voted for. We do not have anyone who voted against or abstained from voting. In conclusion, the dissertation of Evguenii Zazdravnykh, the topic Entrepreneurship, Development in Economically Differentiated Regions of Russia, was submitted in conformity with all the requirements set forth in the relevant regulations on granting academic degree at St. Petersburg State University, and Evguenii Zazdravnykh can be awarded the academic degree of the candidate of science in economics, specialization 080005, economics and management of the national economy. My congratulations. Now you can take the floor for the closing speech. I'd like to thank one and all. I'd like to thank all those present here today. I'm really thankful to my thesis advisor. I'd like to thank the Department of Planning of Social and Economic Process of the Faculty of Economics in Pittsburgh State University. My special thanks is to my colleagues, to all the professors, to Professor Christopher Gary, to many others who were not able to come here today. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining the session of the Dissertation Board. We are closing the session. Please switch off the broadcast.